Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Dave, and this is my podcast. In this season, I am investigating this book, Deathworlds to Lifeworlds. And today we have one of the authors with us, Estrada. She is a doctoral candidate at Field and Graduate University in Santa Barbara, California. And she has contributed a chapter to this book on Deathworlds to Lifeworlds titled Being with Dying, a personal experience with the death of a young person. Please welcome with me, Estrada.
And they are. So, all right, let's get this show on the road.
Let's get the show on the road. Now, I've already done an introduction independently of this call, so we don't have to worry about that. But what I would like to do is, before I ask the questions that I have, let me get your take on phenomenology. We're talking about transformative phenomenology, which are really big words. And part of the reason for doing this podcast is to boil that down to language that is just plain English, that anybody who would, click on the YouTube video would go, wow, that sounds great. I want to try that. Mm-hmm. So what is phenomenology? What is transformative phenomenology in your mind?
Well, to me, phenomenology, when we look at it, we've got parts of the word. We've got phenomenon kind of mixed into phenomenology, and then we have ology. So ology means to study or to look at closely. So that's the first thing we're doing in phenomenology. And then we're looking at events, experiences, our awareness of what is going on in the world or in our lives. And so to me, phenomenology is the study of looking at our awareness, our consciousness about life. And when you also asked a little part about transformative. So how does transformative fit in there? When it is my personal experience and my belief that when we look at and raise our awareness about something, we are now at a new place, a new position, a new viewpoint that we weren't previously in. So that just by itself creates transformation.
But doesn't everybody think about their own awareness? Isn't that a natural thing to do?
I don't think so. I can see from my work with students that no, they're often not aware of what they are doing and what happens when they go down a certain road. And sometimes they need assistance in raising that awareness. And then, yes, I think there is a point if one continues to learn how it feels to look at something closely, to increase the awareness, to increase one's perception, that then, yes, you've now trained yourself, you've now evolved into a higher consciousness, where then I do believe, like you said, that we are introspecting and looking at life and moving forward.
So some element of all this and in becoming aware is a feeling.
Well, feelings are part of what we need to become aware of, because so often we are guided or led or driven by our feelings and emotions, but we haven't really named them or acknowledged their presence. So yes, it involves an embodiment. I mean, that's how one of the ways in which we experience life is through our bodies, and how we think affects our body, so that it all comes together.
Very good. Okay, I think that's an excellent place to begin. Because what you're doing for me is balancing this notion of consciousness and becoming aware of our own consciousness with bodily experience, which I think is vital. But if there's one thing that a lot of people don't seem very aware of, it's all of the messages their bodies are sending them. They, for one reason or another, they're either blocked or they're simply ignorant of them. And I don't see that being a good path in life. But to put the two together makes a lot of sense, and it sounds more empowering. Let me get to some of the questions about the chapter in the book that you wrote. Your chapter is titled Being with Dying, a personal experience with the death of a young person. And it begins with a special hyphenated emphasis on the word being. Would you talk about how you are using that word in this piece?
So there was a little typo, I think. Let me just look in the book so I'm not. Being with was also supposed to be italicized, because it's, so when we put the ending ing with the word be, and because I hyphenated it and italicized it, I wanted to put emphasis on the fact that this was a continuing action. It was not one action or one point in time, but it was it was the continuation and the continuous continuation of the presence of being there for my son. So, and then with, that should have been italicized as well. It was in the book.
I'm looking at the book. I look at the book and I see that with was not italicized.
No, but in other parts within the chapter it was. So
okay.
Anyway, there is the being with, and to me that was my emphasis in my exploration of using writing protocols to explore my personal experience as a mom of continuing to be alongside and somewhat like a partner in or with my son as he died. So, and it was particular to me because I was just there was only me as mom. You know, it wasn't the position of my son's siblings or extended family or his girlfriend or anyone else.
Well, now your experience with a death world, and that's where this is part of his book, Deathworlds to Lifeworlds. I would say it's the most poignant and personal to be found in the book. And I read with interest how you say 6 years separated your experience of your son's death to cancer and your discovery of transformative phenomenology. That's a long gap. So how did this exercise of writing this chapter change your experience of your son's death?
How did it change my experience of my son's death? I want to say it did and it didn't. So as I wrote, I really took I think it was a unique approach, and it was based on personal experiences and knowledge that I brought to that time and place when JC was dying, that I was already aware during that time, maybe not being aware of the awareness, but I was perceptively aware of, I think, what needed to be done or what he needed from me, as opposed to other people in his life. And so then when I used the phenomenological writing protocols, which are just, I'm going to kind of refer them as to exercises.
Yes.
They're guided, maybe in the sense like a guided meditation.
Mhm.
But each one of the protocols, each one of the writings focused on a certain aspect. And it was really enlightening to be able to look at this whole period of time from the aspect of the earliest or my first experience, the most poignant one that seemed to slap me in the face, to what wasn't. I think that was when I was writing the protocol on the opposite, or what is not present. That was the most difficult writing that I undertook. And it's because I kept getting off track. And so that that created the most new insights into not necessarily his transitional world or the death world into which he entered, but for me, again, a reaffirming of what the life world is. Because the life world, his life world, was fading. And as he made a transition into a death world, but for me, like, I had to keep not discounting the life world that my other children exhibited, well, were living, that we all were living, except for him. And so it just put a different viewpoint on looking at, man, maybe I scraped by, maybe I did something right for my other kids, but I'm very aware now of what those that survive, they need attention too. So, but it wasn't just the knowledge, it's just like how important that was. And so for me, that now in my life transforms what I see is how I treat others. That saying that we never know what someone else is experiencing or what happened to them earlier in the day.
Right.
And, maybe that's cutting somebody some slack, but maybe it's just acknowledging that there are other things going on, and I should be aware of those and be kind and not harsh and probably not loud. I tend to get loud.
I want to come back to this question of others in just a moment, but
Sure.
First, let me ask you this. Some parts of your chapter come across as measured, scientific, clinical, even a bit removed, while others reveal the immediacy of your full range of emotion, a mother's heart threatened with the loss of her own son. For readers who might struggle with the juxtapositioning of openly emotional experience with the cooler, more cerebral acts of a researcher, how do you reconcile what appear as mutually exclusive drives?
They're all part of my life. They're all part of all of our lives. You know, we're parents, we're workers or professionals in whatever sense that is, and kind of no different than being a scholar or a student of. So I don't know in terms of, see, that's an awareness, or I would describe it as an awareness of what state am I being in now? What, you know, and I think most people can relate, you know, when they're at work, there's a professionalism, a technical expertise that one demonstrates and goes through the day and does the job and produces the product or creates the outcome. And you can go home and be in a totally different mode. So I think it's all part of life. And to acknowledge that all those parts are part of life and part of the life world is, to me, I don't see so much the juxtaposition.
So my follow-up question would be, do you have any difficulty changing gears, going from being a researcher and then being a mom at home with your kids, or any other aspects of your life, shifting gears among them? Is that a challenging thing, or is it really quite easy?
Well, for me personally, I find it rather easy and don't seem to, I don't perceive, I might have to look at that. I don't perceive myself as having to step into new shoes, to step into a new role. So.
Okay. All right, well, now let's go back to a couple things that you wrote in your chapter. There are, as many of us who studied phenomenology know, what we call existential prompts to help us to write about, to do our phenomenology. And two of those that you wrote about were time and others. Mm-hmm. They figure prominently. Sometimes time speeds up, sometimes it slows down. When it comes to others, JC's friends sometimes came into disagreement with you, and in spite of the heavy burden of your son's condition, you say you had to handle those moments with kid gloves. So could you speak a little bit more about these aspects of your protocol, time and others?
Well, okay, I guess we'll start with time. You are correct. Moments can pass quickly. Moments can go by very fast. And what I think was important to me was, number one, that acknowledgement of how time is perceived. Is it short? Is it long? You know, when you're not feeling well and you're filling the days with watching TV or playing a board game, you know, I looked at that and went, oh, you know, like, daytime TV is certainly not my cup of tea. But, you know, it became, it was important to him, to them, to the others who were around, because it marked time. You know, like, I don't know what was on at 11 a.m., but there was some show, and like, even if everybody slept late, 11 a.m., that TV went on. We had to be there for whatever the show was. And that was marking time. And I guess I want to say that was the point that I was trying to look at, was what are our markers about time? Because it's not just, we pay attention to it. We pay attention to it, whether it's the time the TV goes on or looking at our watches or our phones to denote the time. We pay attention to what happens when it gets dark, you know, as opposed to when it gets light. You know, there's all these, it's important to note, because that affects, I believe, how we might go about or what we do during the day.
So kind of what you're saying is that the time issue, because you used TV as a way to market, and the television was on, even though you're not a fan of daytime television, it was also a way to relate to others around JC as well as him. Time passing, sort of, that the question of it helped create a bit of a bond there as you watched.
Of course it did. I mean, it was, and I have to say, in this particular circumstances, time revolved around JC. We all did either what he liked or what he felt his body needed, you know? So there has to come a time where you wake up. And for us, during that period of time, it was always late morning, because we were always up way into the night, because that was what that was kind of the path that he was following. So that obviously does. I mean, there was no time. I mean, yes, somebody had to go out and get groceries, and you had to go and, you know, do a few things. And there were the doctor's appointments that interject themselves. But really, it was the continuous creation of the bond with him and others with him that was important. So time kind of led us through that bonding.
Okay. Let me wrap up with you with one final question, a bigger question about the book itself, Deathworlds to Lifeworlds. As a contributor, what do you feel is going to be this book's greatest contribution to public dialogue for people who pick this up? This is not the usual sort of book one finds in the airport.
You are correct. Although, wouldn't it be nice if tomorrow I hop on a plane that this book is sitting there front and center on the limited space shelves? I think the book itself brings awareness about life worlds and death worlds. And if we think about, if it even just piques our curiosity, then we've changed by the title itself. Because I think it does that. It gets us to look of, oh, what is a life world? What is a death world? And which way are we headed? Or is this action heading towards more life and growth, or towards disease and death? So it also brings in the part of, from the title, the word to, implies a transition. So what are those what is or the many transitional worlds as one moves from a life world to a death world? And if we understand the transitional worlds, well, what do we have? What responsibility do we have to make the shift from backwards, from death worlds to a more sustainable, contributive life world?
Very good. Thank you for that answer. I appreciate it. It's a good way to encapsulate the book, and that it isn't just the first word, death worlds, but it's the transitioning to life worlds. I like that. Thank you. Carol, thanks for taking this time. It's been great. And
Well,
I look
thanks for
forward
having
to
me.
We'll do it again soon.
Okay, that sounds good.